Okay, screencast number 3, resources and production possibility curves. Everything in these screencasts is testable and on the AP exams. That said, this screencast might be the most important of the ones in the first unit because it deals with production possibility curves, which you're going to see on both the micro and macro AP exams. All right, so a little review. The whole foundation of economics is this idea that humans have unlimited wants. There are scarce resources with which to satisfy these wants. And the idea that goods and services can provide us with utility, with happiness, whether those goods and services are luxuries or necessities, in either case, they provide us with some measure of satisfaction, benefit, pleasure. We call that utility. All right, so let's talk about what those resources are, those scarce resources that I was referring to. Sometimes these are called the factors of production, and there are 4 of them in economics. The first one is land. That's everything that's on land, inland, grows from land, etc. So corn, minerals, the land itself. That's one resource we can use to produce goods and services that bring us utility. The second one is labor, people working. So, you'll probably be the resource of labor at some point in your life. You'll be working, producing things. The third thing is capital. Now, capital is considered an investment. Think of capital as goods that we produce in order to produce other goods. Goods that we don't want in and of themselves, but we want because they make other things for us. So for example, we don't make tractors because we enjoy tractors. We make tractors because they help us make food. That's capital. Now, real capital are those things, those goods that make other goods. So any goods that businesses use to produce things, we're going to call that real capital. There's also something known as human capital, which is education, training, an investment in humans that makes us more productive. All right, last kind of resource is called entrepreneurial ability. That's the person who starts the company, who comes up with the idea to produce that new good or service. And between these 4 resources, land, labor, capital, entrepreneurial ability, goods and services get produced. So for example, if a farmer is producing corn, they're using all 4 resources. The farmer himself or herself is the owner, the runner of the business, using capital like tractors and combines and that kind of stuff, using labor, maybe workers to help pick the corn, and of course using land. Now, a little note about entrepreneurial ability. It's maybe the most abstract resource of the 4. My favorite example of entrepreneurial ability is the guy that invented the pet rock. Now, this is kind of before your time. It's really before my time, but I read about him and I just love this guy. This is a guy, I think it was in the 70s. He found this little rock on the ground, put 2 googly eyes on it, put it in a box with air holes so that it could breathe. Included an instruction booklet on how you care for your rock and how you feed it and keep it warm, I guess, or whatever. This guy made millions. I mean, that's an entrepreneur, someone who comes up with a new idea, puts together various unexplored ideas, and comes up with something new. All right, well, each of these resources costs money, and each of them gets a payment if you want to use it as a business. When you want to use a resource, you have to pay for it, and each of those payments have names. So if you use land or somebody else's land, you have to pay for it, and we call that payment rent. If you want to use someone's labor, you have to pay them. We call those wages. The payment for capital we'll call interest, and we'll explain why that is a little bit later on in the course. And the entrepreneur doesn't get a payment as such, it's the entrepreneur who gets the profits or losses from the business that they create. All right, now the goal in economics is efficiency, and that means 2 separate things, 2 different kinds of efficiency. Excuse me. The first kind of efficiency we already talked about. It's called allocative efficiency. Think of that as producing the right amount of things, the right things in the right amounts. So the perfect amount of stuff for society. We looked at that in marginal benefit and marginal cost terms. So you can think of that as producing anything up to the point where the marginal benefit that society is going to get from it is equal to the marginal cost. The second kind of efficiency is called productive efficiency. And what that means is that whatever you're producing at the least possible cost, producing with the fewest possible resources. So to be efficient in economics, you need both these kinds of efficiencies. You need to be producing the right things in the right amounts, and you have to be doing it in the least cost, least resource intensive way. So for example, if we were to produce typewriters instead of computers, we wouldn't be allocatively efficient. People don't really want typewriters anymore. If we were to produce typewriters at the lowest possible cost that you could produce typewriters, we'd be productively efficient, but not allocatively efficient. On the other hand, if we produce computers, but it costs us $1 million to produce each computer, we might be allocatively efficient, producing the right amount of computers, but we wouldn't be productively efficient. All right, so that's the goal in economics. We're trying to make ourselves as happy as possible. We want to use the scarce resources that we have in the most efficient way possible in order to do that. Now, a little sideline for yourself. I noted it down here. In the future, we're going to give a name to productive efficiency. We're going to call it minimum average total cost, or minimum ATC. That's going to be important later on. I wanted to mention it here so that the term might be familiar to you when we come back to it. All right, now allocative efficiency, again, we've seen before. It's the place where marginal benefit is equal to marginal cost. If we're thinking about how much pizza society wants to consume, for example, remember, marginal benefits tend to decline, diminishing marginal utility. Marginal costs tend to rise for reasons we'll talk about in the future, and we want to go to where they're equal. So if we only produced one pizza, or in this example, according to the graph that you see, we'd be underallocated, not producing enough pizza. If we produced 3 pizzas, we'd be overallocated, producing too much, producing pizzas where the marginal benefits are less than the marginal cost. In the graph that you see in front of you, 2 pizzas would be the perfect amount of pizza. We'd call that allocative efficiency. Okay, so that brings us to production possibility curves, one of the most important graphs we're going to see because you're going to see them both in microeconomics and macroeconomics. It's our first real model in economics and our first important graph. It's going to show some of these concepts conceptually, the ideas of productive efficiency and allocative efficiency. And in constructing this graph, we're going to make some simplifying assumptions. First assumption we're going to make is that we are in fact productively efficient. We're producing things in the least possible cost with the fewest possible resources. Secondly, we're going to assume fixed resources, meaning that we have a certain amount of resources, and in the middle of constructing this graph, we're not going to all of a sudden discover a new planet with a new workforce and a new supply of oil and steel, etc. We're going to keep resources fixed. Third, we're going to keep technology fixed. We're not going to invent the internet or the internet version 2 in the middle of drawing our graph. And then finally, for the sake of simplicity, we're going to assume that we can only produce 2 products. The reason for that is that we're going to be dealing with a 2-dimensional graph. It's possible to do this for 3 or 4 products. The graphs just become more and more complicated, and you start to need to use computers to see it. In AP Economics, we stick with 2-dimensional graphs, and for that reason, we're going to make the very false assumption that we can only produce 2 products. So in this example, the 2 products we're going to use are pizza, that's a consumer good, I'll tell you what that means in a bit, and robot arms, which I'm going to call a capital good and also explain in a little bit. All right. What if, using all of our time and resources, so all the workers we have, all the resources we have, all the time that we go about producing each of these things, and we find that if we spend all of our time producing robot arms, like all year all we do is make robot arms, we make 10,000 of them. Alternatively, if we spend all of our time making pizza, at the end of the year we'll wind up making a certain amount of pizza, let's say 400,000 pizzas. Those are 2 different production possibilities. We can make 10,000 robots and no pizza. We can make 400,000 pizzas and no robots. But the truth is, we can also make combinations in between. If we're only producing robot arms, then to get some pizza, we're going to have to give up some of those robots, right? If everyone's already sitting there making robot arms and I decide I want to start making some pizza, I'm going to have to take some of those people away from making the robots and get them to start making pizza. We'd call that opportunity cost, right? Likewise, if we're only making pizza, to get some robot arms, we'd have to give up some pizza. Some of those people would have to move over to the robot arm factory in our country. Again, these are opportunity costs, and the production possibility model is going to be a way that we're going to be able to see opportunity costs graphically. So let's look at a few different combinations. I'm going to start to construct a graph and look at some combinations of pizza and robots, and these are hypothetical numbers that our hypothetical country can produce. In our graph, we put each good on an axis. Doesn't really matter which good goes on which axis. Here I've put the robots on the y-axis and the pizzas on the horizontal axis. Now again, let's start off in a world where all we're doing is making robots. In that world, what we said is we can make 10,000 robots and we wouldn't be making any pizza. That would be one point in our graph, one possible production possibility, 10,000 robots, no pizzas. Let's say I want to start making some pizza. So I take people out of the robot factory, put them into the pizza factory, and I find that if I do that, we can make 9,000 robots and 100,000 pizzas. Again, that would be a different point in this production possibility curve graph, a different set of these goods that we could possibly produce. As I continue to make more pizza, I continue to take people off the robot production line, and I start getting different combinations. If I want 2 pizzas, I'm now only having 7,000 robots. 3 pizzas, 4,000 robots, etc. In a world where all we're doing is making pizza, 400,000 pizzas, that gives us no robots. Now, if you look at those points, you'll start to notice that it's starting to look like a curve. And in fact, we call those points a production possibility curve. Each of those points is a different alternative combination of pizza and robots that we can have in our country with fixed resources, fixed technology, and a fixed amount of time. Now, you'll notice that what's happening to the opportunity costs as we increase pizza production or robot production. I'll take you back to the numbers. Notice that as we increase pizza production, for every 1 increase in pizza, we're giving up more and more robots. As we go from 0 to 1, we're giving up 1 robot. Here we're giving up 2 robots. Here we're giving up 3, and there we're giving up 4. Notice that those opportunity costs are increasing. Every time we want another 100,000 pizzas, we have to give up bigger and bigger chunks of robots. Now there's a reason for that. It's those increasing opportunity costs that's leading to that specific shape of the production possibility curve, that bowed out, concave from the origin shape. Most production possibility curves look that way, and the reason for that is that resources are not perfectly adaptable to alternative uses. Resources that are good at making pizza may not be as good at making robots, and vice versa. So for example, bringing you back to the numbers, if all we're doing is making robots and no pizza, and I decide we want to start making pizza, I'm going to look across at my workforce and I'm going to start picking off people to move out of the robot factory and into the pizza factory. Well, who am I going to pick? I'm not going to pick my best robot workers, I'm going to pick my worst robot workers. So getting that first 100,000 pizzas isn't really costing me that much in terms of robots because I'm just getting rid of my worst workers anyway. But as I continue to move people from the robot factory to the pizza factory, notice what's happening to the number of robots that I'm producing. It's going down, and it's going down in bigger and bigger chunks. I'm getting better and better workers out of that robot production line, and as a result of that, I'm losing more and more robots. All right. Now, other shapes of production possibility curves are possible, but they're less likely. And I'll leave it to you to think about what a production possibility curve would look like if there were constant opportunity costs. What if you had to give up the same amount of pizza or the same amount of robots for each additional unit of the other that you wanted? What about decreasing opportunity costs? What if you had to give up less and less the more and more you wanted of the other good? Most confusingly, what if there were 0 opportunity costs? What would the production possibility curve look like if you didn't have to give up any robots to get more pizza? I'll leave it to you to think about those. All right, so here's our production possibility curve again, a different graph here, just showing some different numbers, or the numbers a little bit differently. A, B, C, D, and E, again, those are different production possibilities, assuming that we're being productively efficient, assuming we're producing as much as we can, given the resources that we have. If that's the case, anything inside the curve where the yellow is, any point there would be productively inefficient, because we could have more of both things. So we want to be on the curve. We don't want to be inside the curve. Being inside the curve means something probably went wrong. Maybe there's unemployment. Maybe people aren't working. Maybe we can't use all of our resources for whatever reason. Being at a point like U would be regrettable because there's not enough human happiness anyway, and we could make more stuff and satisfy more wants and needs, but we're not. We're being inefficient in some way. Being on the curve, again, any of those points, A, B, C, D, or E, is both attainable and productively efficient. It's the most that we can get to. And for that reason, sometimes production possibility curves are called production possibility frontiers, because it shows you the boundary between what's possible and impossible for a given country. A point outside the curve, a point like point F, would be ideal, better than anything that we have, but it would be unattainable. It's simply not a combination of robots and pizzas that we can produce given our limited, scarce resources. All right, now economic growth is the ability to produce more stuff. Or going back to the graph, a point like F would be a point we'd like to get to, right? It's more of both. Getting to that point would be the process of economic growth. In production possibility curve terms, it's represented as a rightward shift of the production possibility curve. That's how we're going to see economic growth in economics. And it could be caused by a number of different things. If we find more resources, a new discovery of oil, we might be able to produce more stuff. If the resources that we have become more productive, if we train our workers or educate them more, we might get more stuff produced. Technological advances, the car, the telephone, the internet, can all lead to more production in the future. And as we're going to see at the end of the year, international trade can also lead to economic growth. So what would that look like in the production possibility curve model? Again, it would look like a rightward shift. Let's say that this production possibility curve represents where we are now. If we get new technology, more resources, better resources, international trade, our production possibility curve might look like this in the future, right? Those points are all preferable to the points that we're currently at because it's more of both things. Now finally, I want to get back to that distinction between consumer goods and capital goods. You'll remember I said that pizza was a consumer good, robots are probably a capital good. Every single point on the production possibility curve is productively efficient. So on one level, it doesn't really matter which point we pick. They're all meaning that we're doing the most that we can, producing the most that we can. On another level, producing capital goods like robots is going to lead to more economic growth in the future. A consumer good like pizza doesn't really do anything much for us in terms of economic growth. We buy it, we eat it, we enjoy it, and it's gone. Capital goods are goods that produce other goods. So if we pick an allocation where we're producing more capital goods, maybe in the future we're going to be able to produce more of pretty much everything. I think back to the ant and the grasshopper story, and I always kind of get it confused, so I have to think about it for a second. The grasshoppers didn't plan for the future, they just partied. I think I'm right about that. The ants worked hard now, and then they had more later. That's the difference between consumer and capital goods. The ants are like capital goods, investing now for more stuff later. The grasshoppers are like consumer goods, partying now at the expense of mortgaging their future, essentially. So here's a production possibility curve. Notice on the y-axis I have capital goods, on the x-axis I have consumer goods. Let's say that we're on the curve and we pick the point, the yellow point that you see there. We decide to produce that amount of consumer and capital goods. Notice that's mostly consumer goods, relatively few capital goods. Well, in the future, we're going to have, ooh, that was a good little voice crack, right? In the future, we're going to have some economic growth. We're producing some amount of capital goods, some amount of robots, for example. On the other hand, with the same exact production possibility curve, if we pick an allocation that's more tilted towards capital goods, like the one on the right, In the future, we're likely to see even more economic growth, an even larger shift out of that production possibility curve. All right, we're going to be doing an experiment with production possibility curves in class if we haven't done it already, which should help tie up the any remaining points that might be out there. But again, if not, come in and ask questions.
All right, so here is the chicken you'll be enjoying tonight.
You have this information. This is fantastic.
Absolutely. His name was Colin. Here are his papers, okay?
That's great.
He looks like a happy little guy who runs around.